Warfare in the ancient world was a brutal affair. There exist powerful accounts of heroic battles where opposing sides used cutting-edge military technology to overpower enemy states. Did the ancients really have siege-busting tanks and hand grenades? Did they use chemical and biological weapons? This is the story of the most famous siege in history, the Battle for Troy. One violent conquest in particular would remain a mythical war, steeped in legend for thousands of years.
Troy is one of the greatest sieges in the history of warfare, simply because of Homer's wonderful epic poem, the Iliad.
Homer, the Greek poet, lived around 800 BC. He spoke about a series of heroic battles known as the Trojan Wars that had taken place centuries earlier. The tale of the Siege of Troy would become the greatest story ever told, one that would resonate across cultures and time. The Iliad provides a powerful account of the warfare and weaponry of the ancient world. It also illustrates how battles were fought by late Bronze Age warriors.
The story of the Iliad begins with the seduction of the most beautiful woman in the contemporary world, Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. She had fallen in love with Paris, one of the younger sons of Priam, king of Troy, and she had run away with him back to Troy.
The Trojans won't prevail on him to send her back to her husband. The outraged husband, Menelaus, contacts his brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae. Between them, they organize a massive flotilla to get back the errant wife.
The ancient Greeks lived in small city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth and Thebes, each with a population of around 100,000. The individual cities vied for military supremacy. Sometimes these city-states would put aside their differences and come together, forming one superforce that would fight against a more powerful common enemy. During the Bronze Age, one powerhouse of a state emerged that would have ambitions to rule not just Greece, but the whole of the Mediterranean. The state would be known as Mycenae, ruled by the mighty Agamemnon.
Agamemnon summoned other Greek leaders to go on a great expedition to punish the Trojans, to get Helen back, and to destroy the rich and powerful city of Troy.
The battle for Troy was fought by two superpowers, the Greeks, who were led by their commander-in-chief Agamemnon, and the Trojans, ruled by King Priam.
In the siege of Troy, the Greeks were really up against it. Troy was an extremely well-defended city. Huge cyclopean walls of massive masonry. The Greeks had no conventional way of burrowing through.
King Agamemnon had to use all of his skills in warfare to fight the Trojans and overcome the walls of this mighty city. The siege of Troy would last 10 years, and it would take an ingenious and audacious siege engine to break the city's defenses and bring about its destruction. But over 3,000 years after the event, historians have been forced to confront an intriguing mystery. Did this extraordinary war machine ever actually exist? At the British Museum, archaeologists have analysed clues from the ancient desert kingdom of the Assyrians, discovered in the northwestern palace of Ashur-nasir-pal. This amazing bas-relief offers startling evidence that complex war machines were in use much earlier than was previously believed. Julian Reed is the former Near East curator at the museum.
In front of me, we've got a siege engine, and the way that that works is that it's got a beam coming out. People inside the siege engine would have maneuvered that beam up and down and to and fro in an effort to break down the wall bit by bit.
Assyria in the 700s, Persia in the 500s developed all the techniques for taking a fortified place, bar one that were ever known in the ancient world.
Geniuses of siege warfare, the Assyrians commonly employed a device known as a wall fly whenever they laid siege to a city or fortified town. The bas-reliefs clearly illustrate them armed with wooden drills reinforced with wall-penetrating iron heads.
The Assyrian war machine is a wheeled structure, a wickerwork shelter with a domed turret at the front, a bit like the neck of a horse.
The framework of an Assyrian siege engine was covered by a material such as canvas, felt or hide. This protected the flammable wooden towers and parapets from fire.
Something that they could do would be to throw down torches with burning tar on them to set the machine on fire. The Assyrians anticipated this by setting up a water vat inside the machine and arranging for water to be poured on the outside to keep it wet. There are two things looking rather like the ends of hose pipes coming out of the front of the siege engine, which would have been letting water down.
So could these giant war machines have been the inspiration for Homer's myth of the Trojan horse?
Because a siege engine is a device holding soldiers which attacks an enemy town, you could then from that derive a story about soldiers being hidden inside such a thing.
Startling evidence has recently been recovered from Syria, which suggests that these machines were already in use 600 years before the Trojan War. From this, it is clear that the ancient Assyrians were already extremely familiar with advanced siege-busting war machines by the time of Troy. We do know that power in the ancient world was determined in the theatre of war, and victory on the battlefield was a gift only bestowed by the all-powerful gods. In antiquity, one of the most important Greek sanctuaries was Olympia, birthplace of the Olympic Games, and dedicated to the most important of the gods. Zeus was the arbiter of war and the god to whom the Greek warriors would pray for victory in battle. The people of this time would offer the god of their choice exquisite gifts and sacrifices. These were known as votive offerings. These offerings were believed to buy the favors of the gods and ensure victory in battle. This collection of warriors' helmets recovered from the site of Olympia are believed to have been votive offerings made to Zeus. They provide interesting clues as to the scale and importance of warfare in ancient Greece. This bronze breastplate, complete with spear holes, is engraved with depictions of Zeus. It's a testament to the highly skilled metallurgy techniques developed throughout the Bronze Age. Scientific study of weapons that have been found over the last 2 centuries have revealed that the people of antiquity had a complex understanding of how to work with the metals that were available to them.
This is an ancient Greek helmet dating to about 650 BC. It's remarkably lightweight. It weighs about 3¼ pounds. That's about the equivalent of a modern infantry helmet.
Dr. David Starley is an investigative science officer at the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds. He used X-ray technology to investigate the internal structure of this ancient helmet.
The great advantage of X-ray radiography is that it allows us to see beneath the surface, but it doesn't do any damage to the object itself.
The advanced production techniques of this late Bronze Age helmet baffle us today.
The density of the X-ray image relates to the thickness of the metal. It's been produced to very high standards. It's a very even 2mm thickness. We think of bronze as being an easily cast material, but in fact the evidence seems to be that this was hammered. We don't have any of the little imperfections, things like gas bubbles, casting defects in this object.
Only now are we beginning to understand just how advanced Bronze Age weapons were.
It doesn't get more advanced than this. It's a superb piece of not only technology but craftsmanship.
The Greeks were renowned throughout the ancient world as highly skilled metallurgists, having mastered how to make bronze by mixing tin and copper. Military engineers were for the first time able to develop high-quality, durable and effective weapons. In the Shefton Museum in Newcastle, some of the world's earliest examples of Greek Bronze Age weaponry date back to the middle of the 16th century BC.
Weapons in the late Bronze Age are not toys. They're absolutely lethal. They're sharp, they're strong, you can see they're durable.
Intriguing archaeological evidence is beginning to emerge that over 3,500 years ago, Greek technology was becoming sophisticated enough to allow for the production of weapons on a mass scale.
The weapons themselves show you that these people were experts.
This rapier-like sword is one of the world's oldest surviving examples of Bronze Age weaponry. Incredibly, it dates from 400 years before the Battle of Troy and is an early example of Greek military craftsmanship.
This is 3,500 years old, and I could sharpen it up and I could use it. We cannot produce this today. It can't be done.
We know that King Agamemnon had a vast arsenal of weapons and the huge war chest needed to finance an invasion. Yet today, one vital question remains. Did the Battle of Troy ever really take place? Many believe that the Trojan War is merely the stuff of myth and legend, but one man shocked the world with his amazing discoveries and forever changed our understanding of warfare in the ancient world. Around 1200 BC, King Agamemnon raised an incredible force to bring back Helen, the beautiful queen of Sparta, from the clutches of the Trojans. Yet this was not just a simple rescue mission. Agamemnon had plans to control the entire Mediterranean. Queen Helen provided the perfect excuse to lay siege to Troy, one of the most powerful and wealthy regions of the late Bronze Age. Agamemnon raised the greatest fleet ever assembled in the ancient world, and Helen was to go down in history as the face that launched 1,000 ships. Historians now believe that in reality the Armada was probably a fleet of 100 ships, but even by today's standards, this would have constituted a massive army of up to 5,000 men. It was the biggest invading force ever to cross the Mediterranean. Most of the ships in the fleet were pentaconters, the first purpose-built warship. A large pentaconter could be up to 31 meters in length. Its width of over 4 meters allowed the rowers to work the oars. These ships had a top speed of 9 to 10 knots, which is about 12 miles per hour, the equivalent of a ferry traveling through the Aegean today. With this mighty force assembled, King Agamemnon faced his greatest challenge. The walls appeared impenetrable, and up until the 19th century, the details of the story were impenetrable too. Troy carried mythical significance, due mainly to Homer's great classical text, the Iliad. In Oxford's Bodleian Library, there is one of the oldest surviving copies of Homer's epic work.
The text that we have here, the so-called Hawara Iliad, dates from round about 200 AD. The bit in front of us tells of the mustering of the Greek ships that went to Troy.
For centuries, archaeologists searched in vain for the geographical location of Homer's Troy. Then in the 19th century, a German historian set out to find Troy using the Iliad as a compass. What Heinrich Schliemann discovered was to astound the Western world.
Schliemann and his predecessors read the Iliad almost as a code. They were searching for clues for the real historical site of Troy.
Schliemann identified one particular mound in northwestern Asia Minor and set about investigating it, excavating it, and struck lucky.
Schliemann traveled to Turkey, to the area around Hisarlik. He thought that he would find Troy there. Having negotiated with 2 Turkish businessmen who owned the land surrounding a particular fort mound, Schliemann started digging. He began to uncover the remains of a great city. He knew he'd discovered something extraordinary. Troy was right beneath his feet.
We agree that he was right. He did find the site of Troy.
In 1874, Heinrich Schliemann discovered a large cache of gold and silver. It's the richest single find to date. He called it Priam's treasure because he believed it to be the king of Troy's gold, buried at the time of the Trojan Wars. Over 100 years later, some of the world's leading archaeologists are still trying to unravel the reality behind the myth of Troy.
In the late Bronze Age, we estimate that in the order of 5,000 to 10,000 people may have lived here.
Ernst Pernicka's team continued to piece together evidence indicating that Troy was inhabited by a wealthy and warlike people. Remarkably, archaeologists have also uncovered new evidence that suggests that siege warfare could well have taken place there.
We have a few arrowheads, like this one here, indicating warfare. We do not know why we have so few, but maybe they have been collected again because bronze was still a very valuable material.
It's incredible to think that these finds may have been used in the siege of Troy. There are other tantalizing clues to suggest that this may have been the site of a major battle.
An interesting fact is these pebbles, river pebbles, they were collected and brought up on the hill. They are usually interpreted as slingshots. It is the more likely because we have similar pebbles made of burnt pottery, burnt clay.
The fact that a large number of slingshots has been found at the site leads experts to believe that a surprise attack may have left the occupants with no time to use them to repel the enemy.
Another interesting feature that may have to do with warfare are these polished stones. They have a hole in the middle. They can serve as an end piece on a chariot.
But from these fragments, is it possible to deduce what armor and weaponry they would have used in hand-to-hand combat? At the time of the siege of Troy, heroic individual combat played an integral part in deciding the outcome of a conflict. King Agamemnon brought along an elite force of fighters that struck fear into all who faced them. They were led by one of the finest warriors in the ancient world, Achilles.
It happens to contain the passage describing Achilles and his myrmidons, and one can even see the name Achilles, Achilleus in Greek.
The greatest battle of the Iliad tells of a showdown between Hector, the foremost Trojan champion, and Achilles. Their duel was to be one of the defining moments in 10 years of brutal conflict.
Ordinary soldiers moving in close with their short swords would have been a rough and dirty business, whereas the duels that Homer describes in his poem, these are more idealized, perhaps almost ritual combat. When the Greek hero Achilles was eventually provoked into fighting with Hector, the Trojan champion, they met on the plain outside Troy. It was the custom to throw spears, first of all. Neither spear found its target. So Hector moved in with his sword to finish the thing. By this time, Achilles had retrieved his spear and thrust it through Hector's throat.
Warriors like Hector and Achilles would have been brought to the battlefield by the first great war machine of the ancient world, the chariot.
This was a culture that prided valor in man-to-man combat, looking at the whites of the eyes. The reality of fighting hand-to-hand is you not only had to be incredibly fit, you had to have incredible stamina. It's the same with a sword cut. If you're going to take a man's arm off, then the amount of power in a stroke like that is exhausting.
The style of fighting between Hector and Achilles was similar to the battles of the gladiators at the height of the Roman Empire. This meant that the chariot at the time of the Trojan War was used in a very specific way.
The chariots were used, therefore, as battlefield taxis, not just to drop the warrior off, but also to relieve him. There they are, in front of their colleagues, winning fame and glory before one and all. But as they tire, their buddy comes in. He comes in, he jumps off, takes the man on they're going to take, and they make their getaway.
3,000 years ago, a revolution in weaponry saw lethal new armaments constructed on an industrial scale. This posed an immense challenge to King Agamemnon's military engineers. Could they develop armor that would prevent mass casualties outside the walls of Troy? King Agamemnon's army had made an epic journey across the Aegean Sea to the very gates of Troy. Faced with near impregnable defenses, they began a siege that was to last a decade. But how did they survive in the open, brutally exposed to all that the Trojans could hurl down at them? Combining archaeological evidence with clues from Homer's Iliad, experts are now deducing what weapons and armour the ancient Greeks used in battle.
The most distinctive element of the equipment I'm carrying is probably the helmet. This particular one represents the final evolution of this style of helmet, which is a Corinthian. And it's very distinctive because of the very long cheek pieces at the front and closed face, which protects you when you're fighting against the enemy, because you would have a big shield across your front.
Greek war engineers manufactured a helmet that maximised the wearer's ability to utilise his critical senses of vision and hearing.
And during the Persian Wars, the ability to give command and control was very important. And with the earlier pattern helmets, that was closed off, so it's like wearing a seashell on your head. All you hear is the sea going round, so people point you at the enemy and give you a big push. Within the later periods, people had to hear what was going on.
In response to the developing arms race, Greek inventors needed to construct armour that could withstand the deadly firepower being used on the battlefield. One innovation used composite materials in order to protect warriors in combat. Incredibly, the armour consisted of a high-density fabric that Greek engineers designed in such a way that it could withstand metal-tipped arrows.
What we've got here is a linothorax, a lin thorax, which is made up of layers of linen glued together. In fact, this one's got 14 layers of linen with a leather core in the middle. It's lighter than metal armour. It moulds itself to your body when it's warm, but it is very, very hard and very, very protective. In many ways, it's akin to modern Kevlar body armour.
A composite bow was used at point-blank range to test the strength of linothorax technology.
That'll hurt. Well, I'm actually quite pleased with that, because that was at point blank range. Remember, this is only cloth that's stopping this arrow. So at a normal combat range, I think that's about the best they could expect for. The fact it punched through, lucky shot.
Despite using a composite bow with a draw weight of 160 pounds hitting at 90 miles an hour, only the tip of the arrow penetrated the armour. Greek war engineers also used composite materials to make shields. In Athens Museum, there is a unique fresco which features a figure-of-8 shield used at the time of the Trojan Wars.
You can see how it covers all of my body. I'm well protected behind this with the disc shape, but the cutouts allow me to use the spear, which is the heroic weapon of the Homeric age. This is the weapon that Achilles is using. Held in here, I've still got movement and can fight while I'm protected.
The reason why the shield was so effective is because of the way it was constructed.
It's light, it's incredibly light, because it's made of wicker, willow, like a basket, tightly packed, tightly woven, very resilient, a little bit of flexibility to absorb impact, but very light and very mobile. With this shoulder strap here, slung on my body, it's no problem at all to fight with, and then a skin of leather just to reinforce that wicker, that willow, but we don't know how tough it's going to be against arrows.
For the first time in nearly 3 millennia, this marvel of ancient technology was put to the test. Even at point-blank range, the arrow failed to penetrate the shield because of its ingenious construction. The clever design would also allow warriors to make running repairs. We now know that the armies of antiquity were equipped with armour that used cutting-edge fibre technology to defend itself against powerful infantry weapons. But there's more. Another recent discovery points to the ancients being well versed in other advanced technologies. A discovery in 1960 would confirm the true sophistication of ancient Greek metallurgy in weaponry. This rare footage shows an extraordinary find near Mycenae in mainland Greece. Archaeologists uncovered this incredibly well-preserved armour that protected warriors over 3,000 years ago. This highly advanced suit of armour is known as the Dendra panoply. Even today, it rivals modern armament design.
Originally, it would have had a helmet, shoulder guards, body guard, thigh guards. It would have been incredibly difficult to use. Very heavy, hard to move around.
The Dendra panoply weighed about 35 pounds and consisted of 15 separate bronze sheets.
The armour used by Homeric heroes was probably quite effective. The Dendra, panoply indicates the power, the strength of this protective equipment.
For maximum protection, the bronze sheets were designed to overlap. They were clamped together by super-strong fibres sewn through holes as small as 2 millimeters in diameter. But how successful would the armour be against the deadly barrage of the Trojans? One of the enduring mysteries of the Battle of Troy is how the Greeks managed to sustain a siege for so many years without their army being destroyed as it tried to penetrate the walls of the mighty city. In 1960, a remarkable archaeological find caused many to rethink their perception of the body armour that existed at the time of the Trojan War. Virtually no armour from the time of the Siege of Troy has survived. However, excavations by Swedish archaeologists of a chamber tomb at Dendra in Greece uncovered an amazingly well-preserved suit of bronze armour. It was from the same period of time as the Trojan siege. During the Trojan War, the main weapon used when firing from a distance was the bow and arrow. But was the Dendra panoply able to protect a warrior from an archer's bow? A champion archer was pitted against the Mycenae armour, and the results filmed in ultra-slow motion.
Well, that was fantastic. This arrow tried to burrow its way through, and it's managed to penetrate ½ an inch. And it's dented and mangled the head of the arrow there. Would have shocked him, but it wouldn't have hurt the man at all.
Even using the armour-piercing arrow, champion archer Mike Ashington failed to cause significant damage to the panoply. Amazingly, although the third shot struck the edge of the panoply, it veered off, snapping the arrowhead off without leaving so much as a mark on the shiny bronze surface. Another shot finds its target right on the heart, but yet again the arrow fails to do more than puncture the outer layer of the armour plate.
There's no way this guy's been hurt. He's been shocked, he's been terrified, but he's not hurt. He's still living to fight another day.
But what would it have been like to have worn this type of armour?
It would have been incredibly difficult to use. Very heavy, hard to move around. Most fighting happens in the summer when the temperatures are over 100. You couldn't actually have worn it, let alone fought in it for long, before suffering from heat exhaustion. The warriors who would use it would be chariot-born. They wouldn't actually have to walk or run around much. It's a trade-off between mobility, usability, and its primary function, defense.
The original helmet was made from boar's tusks. This confirms the Homeric tradition of warriors constructing their helmets from hunting trophies. This replica is made with bone sewn onto a leather cap using linen thread or sinew. It's both malleable and very protective. Despite using a leaf head arrow, which was able to cleave one of the bone plates in two, the armour flexed, absorbing the force of the shot. Even at point-blank range, the warrior would have survived.
Yes! Of course, this is the vulnerable part of this sort of armour. He managed to find the gap. It's gone through, broken the edge of the plate, through the leather lining. That really is a bad day.
A champion archer failed to cause significant damage to the armour, but powerful weapons and armour would not be enough for King Agamemnon to penetrate the fortress of Troy. According to the Iliad, the Greek forces unsuccessfully laid siege to Troy for many years.
At the time the Trojan War is set, the Greeks were sadly lagging behind in siege technology.
The Trojans had so far withstood all the besieging forces' attempts to enter the citadel. The walls were specially constructed so as to make it nearly impossible for conventional siege engines to break through. Ditches were built adjacent to the walls so that any approach by a siege engine would be thwarted, and the walls were built at an angle, thereby frustrating attempts to break through. In addition, the Trojans were extremely successful at defending their beloved city.
Besieging these impregnable fortresses was a difficult job. Not only were the walls impregnable, but the defenders would be constantly throwing weapons, dropping stones.
And worse, We now know that the ancients had access to both chemical and biological weapons.
There are lots of stories of chemical and biological weapons surviving from the ancient world: scorpion bombs, poisonous insects, clouds of smoke.
Archaeologists and scientists have recently discovered that scorpions were used in ancient warfare.
During the Roman siege of Hatra, which is a city in present-day Iraq, the defenders threw pottery jars full of stinging insects and scorpions onto the Roman attackers. There's also evidence of chemical warfare from the ancient world. Naphtha is an inflammable chemical substance, a bit like napalm. The defenders of Hatra were able to throw this naphtha, presumably in pottery vessels, perhaps like these ones, and destroy war machines and cause chaos amongst the ranks.
In 1988, in Hama, Syria, a remarkable discovery was made. It was a set of pottery spheres. These intriguing objects were revealed to be hand grenades dating back 1,000 years. According to Homer, the Trojans used deadly scorpion poison to defeat the Greek warrior Achilles.
In Homer, we've got the death of Achilles, shot in the heel by a poisoned arrow. The ancients had such biological techniques. They knew how to inflict pain and death in a variety of ways.
For a decade, King Agamemnon had laid siege to the impenetrable citadel of Troy, failing to destroy the wealthy and powerful Trojans. Each year, the Greek forces sailed back to Troy in a new attempt to sack the city and reclaim Helen from the clutches of the Trojans.
Throughout the centuries, it's been quite common for warfare to be waged on a seasonal basis, for warfare to be waged in the summer, and people would go home in the autumn where they would be supervising the harvesting of the crops and seeing to the economy that funded their armies.
Each year after the Greek forces had sailed home, the Trojans would celebrate the enemy's departure. But in the 10th year, everything changed. This time, the invading Greeks had come up with a daring, clandestine operation. The man who devised the ingenious plan was Odysseus, a Greek commander and close ally of King Agamemnon. He instructed his military engineers to create what was to become the most famous siege machine in history. The Greeks needed something spectacular because the fortifications and defensive strategies employed by the Trojans were at the cutting edge of siege technology. But is the Trojan horse just a myth? Archaeological discoveries at Troy suggest it was more real than we once thought.
Recent years, the last 5 years or so, there's been some really good archaeology going on at Troy, and they've found a number of things. We always used to believe that Troy was just this citadel on top of this great rock precipice. Apart from anything else, how could you get a horse up there? But now we learn there's a lower town, a big lower town with mud brick walls. So that's something that they could get through. Around those walls, you've got this great double ditch going round the outside, and they found post holes, so it was palisaded, well defended. Now it starts to make sense. Now, they've only got to get through the outer defences.
Excavations at the site have revealed that the construction of Troy's walls ensured that even the most robust siege machine would not be able to penetrate them.
From this vantage point, you get a fairly clear sense of how impregnable the city of Troy would have been at the time of the wars in the late Bronze Age. Behind me, of course, is the northern side of the citadel of Troy, and on top of it, you have to imagine limestone and mud brick fortifications that would have risen about 30 feet high and would have had walls over 10 feet in thickness. No matter how sophisticated the siege engines were, they would have been unsuccessful in conquering the city from this particular side of the mound.
The Trojans would have recognized that the lower town was more difficult to defend. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that Troy was surrounded by a system of ditches that would have prevented infantry, chariots, and siege engines from attacking the walls.
The ditch that you see here is 4 meters wide and up to 2 meters deep. The ditch is a very effective defensive system in a time when you have infantry and chariots. We have excavated here because we have an interruption of the ditch. So this is the main gate, the main entrance to Troy. If there was a Trojan horse, it must have come up here, because this was the only entrance to the upper city, to the citadel.
The Greeks' plan centered on the fortification's one weakness, the gate. Odysseus understood that his siege engine needed to avoid the many defenses employed by the Trojans. But did the Greek engineers at the time of Troy possess the skills to create such a sophisticated device? And does any evidence exist from this period of time that supports the use of a siege engine? In 1961, a stunning ancient artifact was found on the island of Mykonos in Greece. It's one of the most significant finds from the ancient world. It's known as the Mykonos vase, and it clearly depicts the myth of the Trojan horse.
One of the most significant depictions of the Trojan horse, mainly because it's so early, it's roughly contemporary with when Homer would have been composing his poems, is the Mykonos vase.
The image shows soldiers inside the massive structure. The shape of the colossal creature has led to fascinating theories about how the Trojan horse was constructed.
Naturalistic representations of horses in art don't occur until the 5th century BC. We have plenty of evidence for how they did depict horses. And they looked like this. It's primitive, it's pagan, it has this elongated fuselage of a body. It has this high camel neck. It's got a purple mane and tail. That was the high status prestige colour of the ancient world that came from a sea snail just off that Turkish coast. You could perhaps put amethyst for eyes, bronze hooves. Now you've got a most splendid art object, and you can see why it seduced the Trojans into taking it inside.
And most importantly, the Trojan horse had to be so well designed that the ruse would never be discovered. Odysseus's plan was to create a siege engine that could house an elite force of soldiers. Once they had sneaked inside the city, hidden within the horse, they would then open the gates for the rest of Agamemnon's troops. But the Greeks had a problem. Where would they get the timber to build such a huge structure? It's believed that they used the materials from their Pentaconta warships to construct the siege engine. It was an ingenious but audacious strategy, but why did the Trojans fall for it? Fascinating new evidence is emerging that points to two very significant factors in the story of the Trojan horse. The symbol of the horse was very important in Trojan culture, and it's thought that Troy was a center for horse trading in the ancient world. This theory has been further verified by the discovery of collections of horse bones by archaeologists excavating in the region.
These are horse bones. They were found in a late Bronze Age fill. It's evidence of horses being used here.
The second possible reason that the Trojans fell for the Greek device was that the horse was a prized symbol in the ancient world, one associated with power and wealth. The finished horse was a magnificent and imposing structure, one that would have attracted the awe of the Trojans as it sat on the shores of Troy. But why did the Trojans bring it into the city?
In order to understand how this ruse might have expected to work, we need to understand the religious mindset of the peoples of that region and that time.
The Greeks had vanished from the plains of Troy, leaving the horse outside the gates of the city. The Trojans believed that King Agamemnon had surrendered and fled back across the Aegean. He had left the Trojan horse as a gift to the gods to ensure a safe passage across dangerous seas. But the Trojans had other ideas for the horse. If they took this beautiful effigy inside their city, they could offer it to their own gods, thereby bringing the magic of the offering onto their side.
A useful way of winning a battle was to attract the opposition gods over to your side. And the best way of doing that was to bring it inside the fortifications, to bring it through the walls and to set it up in the midst of their city, so that this offering from the Greeks, in fact, became an offering to the gods of Troy.
It had taken King Agamemnon and his warriors 10 years to win the siege of Troy. They had managed to create an elaborate ruse, and their elite forces had been able to penetrate the mighty city walls. One cannot imagine what it must have been like for the soldiers led by Odysseus inside the Trojan horse. Even though they were the most highly skilled fighters of the ancient world, they had to endure 100-degree temperatures for probably up to 24 hours as they waited for Odysseus's plan to work. Meanwhile, King Agamemnon and the rest of his forces covertly returned to the shores of Troy under the cover of night, ready to sack the city once the gates of Troy had been opened by Odysseus's men. Once inside the city, the Greeks showed no mercy.
The besiegers would have swept through the town, killing indiscriminately, not only the warriors, but women, children, even animals.
There were few Trojan survivors. King Agamemnon's vicious assault and burning of the citadel revealed the ruthlessness of warfare in antiquity. It was one of the bloodiest and most barbaric sackings of the ancient world. Even today, the meaning of the Trojan horse carries huge significance in modern culture, being associated with deception and fraud. The siege of Troy would have cost vast amounts of money. As with all wars, ancient or modern, the biggest investment would have been in the quest for the latest and most effective military technology.
In the ancient world, as ever, warfare was the single greatest incentive to technological progress.
We may never know for certain whether the legend of the Trojan horse is myth or reality. But what we can glean from evidence excavated from the ancient world suggests that warfare in the late Bronze Age used sophisticated technology, much of which we no longer have the knowledge or skills to recreate. The siege of Troy was long considered to be little more than a fanciful myth, but today new discoveries are making us reopen the history books and rethink everything we thought we knew about the ancient world.
I don't know if I was chosen or they wanted to get rid of me from 49 Squadron, but I went over to Scampton to join 617. And of course, we wonder what it was all about and the special things we had to do.
Arrived at Scampton, not a lot of information available. Everybody was new, apart from we knew our own crew. Some didn't even know their own crew, they were made up. But a lot of senior officers and bags of ball and braid, we agreed as a crew we'd stay there and do whatever they wanted us to do, and we went on this intensive 6-week flying at low level.
Myself and crew had done about 21 trips, and they'd called for volunteers from experienced crews, and I had a discussion with my crew, and we decided that yes, we would volunteer. It was we didn't know what we were volunteering for, other than that it was going to be for a special operation, and the squadron was a new squadron was being formed for that purpose. So I don't know the reasons behind volunteering. I can't really elaborate except to say that if they wanted volunteers, we were prepared to volunteer.
It became, obviously, when you saw the calibre of the people that had been posted to it, it was going to be something very special.
Nothing was known at all, and this was on everyone's minds. What is it all about? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that?
We didn't really know exactly. We knew it was big. We didn't really know until just about the time it took off what the actual target was.
I remember just going into the ops room and looking at the map and seeing the tapes leading to the dams, and when we really realised what they actually were, what the target actually was and the implications of that, and the fact that the route to the targets travel right up the Ruhr, one of the most heavily defended areas of Germany. That's when there was a certain amount of disquiet amongst the crews, but it was something we just had to accept, that it was going to be another operation to carry out, and we'd have to do our best.
To see more exclusive interviews with the survivors of the Dam Busters raid, visit the History Channel website at thehistorychannel.co.uk.